When 10-year-old Maria's family immigrated from Mexico to the United States, she found herself standing at the crossroads of two worlds, one that felt familiar, filled with the warmth of her childhood home, and another that was cold, confusing, and filled with people who spoke a language she didn't understand. Her parents, eager to give her a better life, worked long hours in factories while Maria attended a school where English was the only language spoken. Every day, she struggled to make sense of the world around her, the foreign words swirling in her head like a storm she couldn't escape. At school, the other kids spoke in rapid-fire English, and though they smiled at her, the kindness often felt hollow, as if a part of her remained locked out of the conversation. Lunch was the hardest part of her day, sitting alone at the cafeteria table, watching the other children chat and laugh, feeling the gnawing isolation in her chest. That was until she met Anna, a girl in her class who, unlike the others, didn't treat Maria like a puzzle to solve. Anna's family had lived in the area for generations, and though she had always been friendly, it wasn't until she saw Maria sitting alone one day that she decided to reach out. Anna didn't speak Spanish, and Maria didn't speak much English, but there was something about the way Anna smiled at her that made Maria feel seen for the first time. Without a word, Anna sat down beside her, offering a piece of her sandwich, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. The two girls sat in silence for a while, exchanging shy glances. But slowly, Anna began to learn a few words in Spanish, and Maria, despite her shyness, tried to understand the new words Anna was teaching her. They started with small things, pointing to objects in the classroom and saying their names in each language. The process was slow, but with each word they shared, a connection began to form, something deeper than language. It was a bond of understanding, of effort, and of patience. As the weeks went by, Anna became more determined to help Maria bridge the gap between their worlds. She started to write down words in both English and Spanish on scraps of paper, handing them to Maria every morning, teaching her the names of things around the school. Slowly but surely, Maria's vocabulary began to grow, and with it, her confidence. The loneliness that had once consumed her started to fade, replaced by a sense of belonging she had never thought possible. Anna didn't stop at just helping Maria with English. She began to include her in class activities, inviting her to join in games during recess, and making sure that Maria felt like part of the group. Other children took notice of Anna's kindness and began to follow her example. They started learning a few Spanish words too, laughing together over the mispronunciations, making Maria feel like she was an essential part of the classroom rather than an outsider. But the breakthrough moment came one afternoon when Maria's teacher asked the class to share a story about their families. When it was Maria's turn, she froze. She wanted to tell them about her mother's sacrifices, about her father's hard work, and about the journey they had taken to get here, but the words tangled in her throat. Anna, sitting beside her, noticed the hesitation. Without a second thought, she leaned in and whispered, "I can help you, Maria. We'll do it together." Maria's heart swelled with gratitude as Anna helped translate her words into English, encouraging her along the way. When Maria finally spoke, the room was silent, hanging on to every word she said. She spoke of her mother's love, her father's strength, and the hope that had carried her family through the darkest times. The other students listened intently, their eyes softening as they began to understand the depth of her story. It wasn't just the language that connected them, it was the shared human experience of love, sacrifice, and the desire to belong. Afterward, Maria realized that the wall she had felt between herself and the rest of the class had finally crumbled, but it wasn't just Anna who had helped her break it down, it was the kindness of a whole group of people who had taken the time to listen, to learn, and to care. From that day forward, Maria became more confident, not just in her English, but in herself. She no longer saw the language barrier as an obstacle, but as something she could overcome with the help of those around her. Anna and the other children had shown her that language, though powerful, was not the only way to connect. It was through kindness, patience, and empathy that true understanding was formed. The story of Maria and Anna is a reminder that the smallest gestures, like a shared sandwich or a few words in a foreign tongue, can build bridges between hearts and break down walls that seem impossible to overcome. It's a story of how a young girl, with the unwavering support of a friend, found her voice in a world that once seemed so distant, and how, together, they bridged a gap that was never truly as wide as it first appeared. Maria had always known her place in the world. She was the daughter of a waitress, raised in a small apartment above a diner where her mother worked long hours, her face etched with the wear and tear of providing for them both. Despite the hard work, Maria never felt poor. Her mother's love and dedication were enough to fill their modest home with warmth and comfort. The diner, a humble establishment nestled in the corner of a bustling city block, had been a constant backdrop to Maria's life. She spent her afternoons doing her homework in a small booth near the kitchen, listening to the chatter of regular customers, watching her mother move swiftly between the tables, always with a smile, always with a quiet strength. Maria's life was simple, yet she had dreams far bigger than her circumstances. She excelled in school, her love for literature and languages keeping her focused during long shifts in the diner, but she kept these dreams to herself. She didn't believe anyone would understand, least of all her mother, who had always told her to be practical, to focus on what was within reach. Yet, Maria held a secret, one that was known to no one but herself. She had a gift for languages. Her talent wasn't just in her ability to learn them quickly, it was in how she could understand the unspoken nuances of communication, the subtle gestures, the expressions that conveyed more than words ever could. She had taught herself French, Italian, and even a little Japanese, often practicing by listening to podcasts or watching foreign films. It was her escape, the one thing that allowed her to dream of a future far beyond the walls of the diner. One day, an unexpected opportunity arose. A wealthy businessman, Mr. Matthews, came into the diner with his colleague. He was a man who seemed worlds apart from Maria, dressed in a sharp suit, his presence commanding the attention of everyone around him. Maria had seen him before, he was a regular customer at the diner, but this time, he was accompanied by a foreign client, a businessman from France, who spoke no English. The moment he entered, the atmosphere in the diner shifted. Maria, who had been clearing plates near the table, overheard their conversation, but it was not the words that caught her attention, it was the rhythm of their speech, the way the French businessman was struggling to express himself clearly. She felt a tug inside her, a call to action that she couldn't ignore. Without thinking, Maria stepped forward, her heart racing, and in a voice that was quieter than she intended, she said, "Excuse me, sir, I speak French." The words hung in the air for a moment, and the room seemed to hold its breath. Mr. Matthews looked up, surprise flickering in his eyes, while the French businessman, who had been growing frustrated with his attempts to communicate, turned his gaze toward Maria. "You speak French?" he asked, his voice full of disbelief. Maria nodded, then, taking a deep breath, she continued in fluent French, offering to translate for the two men. She explained the details of their business discussion, effortlessly switching between English and French, her words flowing like a bridge between worlds. Mr. Matthews watched in stunned silence as Maria facilitated the conversation with ease, her natural ability to communicate transcending the boundaries of language. When the exchange was over, Mr. Matthews turned to Maria, his tone no longer dismissive but filled with genuine admiration. "That was remarkable," he said, his eyes softening. "Where did you learn to speak like that?" Maria, suddenly aware of the attention she was receiving, blushed. "I taught myself," she replied simply, the humility in her voice masking the pride she felt inside. Mr. Matthews smiled, impressed by her modesty and the talent she had so effortlessly displayed. "I could use someone like you on my team," he said, a spark of possibility igniting in his eyes. "Have you ever considered working in international business?" Maria felt her heart skip a beat. The offer was more than she had ever dreamed of, but she hesitated. She didn't know how to bridge the gap between her life as a waitress's daughter and the world Mr. Matthews represented. But he was persistent. Over the next few weeks, he returned to the diner, each time striking up conversations with Maria, asking her more about her skills, her education, and her dreams. Eventually, he offered her an internship at his company, where she could work with clients from all over the world, translating and helping to break down the barriers of language. It was a chance she could not pass up, a chance to transform her life. With a mix of excitement and fear, Maria accepted the offer. Her mother, initially skeptical, saw the determination in her daughter's eyes and gave her blessing. The transition from the diner to the world of international business was a struggle, but Maria threw herself into her work with the same intensity she had given her studies. She learned quickly, mastering new languages, navigating the complexities of business culture, and gradually earning the respect of her colleagues. What started as a simple moment, Maria speaking up when she saw an opportunity to help, became the turning point in her life. Her hidden talent, once a secret, was now the key to unlocking a world she had only dreamed of. She had proven not only to herself but to the world that where you come from doesn't define where you can go. Maria's journey was one of courage and self-discovery, a reminder that sometimes, the greatest opportunities come from simply being true to who you are. Maya was just 8 years old, a small, quiet girl whose family had recently immigrated to the United States. Her parents, having fled war and poverty in their homeland, were determined to build a better life, but language was a barrier they couldn't easily overcome. Maya, however, had an innate gift for languages, a skill she had developed since childhood in her home country, where she had been exposed to multiple dialects and had learned to adapt quickly. She was always observant, always listening and absorbing the sounds and nuances of different languages. Her parents, struggling with their own limited English, often relied on Maya to translate for them in the simplest of moments at the store, at the doctor's office, or when they needed to communicate with their neighbors. Though Maya was shy and introverted, this role gave her a sense of purpose. On a crisp winter evening, Maya's parents attended a community event designed to welcome new immigrants into the area. It was meant to be a night of celebration and cultural exchange, with representatives from different countries sharing their traditions, stories, and food. Maya's parents, grateful for the opportunity but unsure of the social dynamics, felt uncomfortable in the crowd of strangers. As the night progressed, Maya noticed her parents' anxiety. They had been sitting quietly in the back, not speaking much, overwhelmed by the fast-paced conversations and the unfamiliar faces surrounding them. At one point, the host, a well-meaning woman who spoke with a heavy accent, invited everyone to take part in a roundtable discussion about what it meant to be an immigrant in a new country. The group consisted of several community leaders, including a couple of influential local business owners and even a representative from the mayor's office. As the discussion began, Maya's parents, despite their eagerness to participate, were unable to follow along, as the conversation was moving too quickly for them to catch up. The tension in their faces grew, and Maya could feel it in her chest. Her mother whispered something in her father's ear, and for a brief moment, Maya saw her parents look at each other with a kind of helplessness that tore at her heart. They had always been strong, resilient people who had faced unimaginable challenges, but here, in this new land, they were vulnerable and small. In that moment, something inside Maya clicked. She had always been a quiet observer, but the pressure of the situation and the desire to ease her parents' discomfort pushed her into action. Without a second thought, Maya stood up from her seat and walked toward the table, her tiny frame almost lost in the crowd of adults. She hesitated for only a moment before speaking up. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft but steady, "my parents would like to say something." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to this little girl who, without any warning, had spoken up. The adults at the table exchanged confused looks, unsure of how to respond. But Maya, unfazed by their reactions, went on, "My parents came here from country name, and they want to share what it's like to leave everything behind and start over." Her words, though simple, had a weight to them that drew the room's attention. She wasn't just a child, she was their voice, their bridge to a world that was still foreign to them. Maya turned to her parents, who were now looking at her with a mixture of surprise and pride, and repeated in their native language what she had just said. Then, with a calmness that surprised everyone, she translated their words into English. "We left our home to build a better life. We want to contribute, to be part of this community," Maya's mother said, her voice thick with emotion. Maya's translation was imperfect, but the sincerity in her words resonated deeply with the room. The community leaders, who had been busy talking about their own experiences, now paused, their attention fully on Maya and her parents. It was as if the simple act of a child speaking up had broken through an invisible barrier that had separated them from the rest of the room. As the conversation continued, Maya's parents began to speak more confidently, encouraged by the respect and understanding they now felt. The room was no longer filled with the discomfort of strangers, it had become a place of shared stories and genuine connection. Maya's quiet courage had bridged a gap that no one had even realized existed. Her translation had done more than just help them understand each other's words, it had helped them understand each other's humanity. By the time the night ended, Maya's parents were no longer the quiet, unsure immigrants they had been when they first arrived. They had found their voice in a room full of people who, through Maya's unspoken courage, had learned to listen. The community leaders, now fully aware of the struggles and hopes that Maya's family carried, welcomed them with open arms. Maya, though exhausted from the night's emotional weight, felt a quiet satisfaction deep in her chest. She had not only helped her parents feel at home, she had reminded everyone in the room of the power of empathy and connection. That night, Maya proved that even the smallest of voices could change the course of a conversation, break down barriers, and foster understanding. It was the beginning of something new for her family, not just a new life in a new country, but a sense of belonging in a world that had once seemed so distant and unreachable. In the heart of a bustling city, where the lives of the wealthy and the struggling were often separated by glass skyscrapers and silent streets, there lived a waitress named Clara, who worked tirelessly in a small, modest cafe. Clara was the kind of woman who always wore a smile despite the fatigue that lined her face, a woman who, despite all her struggles, never let the weight of the world dim her spirit. Her daughter, Lily, was her greatest joy, an intelligent, bright-eyed child whose curiosity knew no bounds. Though Clara could never afford the luxuries other children took for granted, she always encouraged Lily to dream, to seek knowledge, and to never let her circumstances define who she could become. Every afternoon, After school, Lily would sit in the cafe, doing her homework at the corner table, silently observing the people who came and went, sometimes with wonder, sometimes with curiosity. Among the regular patrons was Mr. Samuel Whitaker, a millionaire businessman who owned several high-profile companies. He was a man of great wealth and influence, with an air of superiority that matched his towering figure and expensive suit. He often sat in the corner booth of the cafe, alone, sipping his coffee, and staring out the window with a look of quiet contemplation. His life was one of perfection, a world of meetings, investments, and power, yet there was a palpable sadness behind his eyes, a loneliness that came from living a life so disconnected from the realities of the world outside his corporate empire. Clara often exchanged pleasantries with him, always polite but never crossing the invisible divide that separated their worlds. Lily, on the other hand, had always been intrigued by him. One day, as she sat at her usual spot, her eyes caught a glimpse of Mr. Whitaker, who was speaking to a business associate in a language she didn't recognize. The words were flowing smoothly, but they were foreign to her ears. As the conversation continued, Lily couldn't help but feel a sense of fascination. The cadence of the language was beautiful, and for reasons she couldn't explain, she felt drawn to it. At home that night, as Clara prepared their modest dinner, Lily asked her mother, "Mom, what language was Mr. Whitaker speaking today?" Clara paused, her brow furrowing as she thought for a moment. "Oh, sweetheart, I think that was Japanese. It's a beautiful language, but it's not something we usually hear around here." Lily's eyes sparkled. "I want to learn it, Mom. I want to understand what Mr. Whitaker was saying." Clara smiled softly, but her heart sank. They had little money for extra lessons, and the idea of paying for Japanese classes seemed as far-fetched as flying to the moon. Still, she didn't want to crush her daughter's enthusiasm. "Well, if you really want to learn, I can help you with what I know. But it'll take time." Over the following months, Clara did her best to teach Lily what she could. She borrowed books from the library and found free online resources, and Lily, determined to learn, practiced every day after school. Her passion was palpable. She would write out kanji characters on pieces of paper, recite phrases in her room, and even practice speaking Japanese with the few tourists who came into the cafe. The more Lily learned, the more she felt connected to a world far beyond her small town, a world that seemed as distant as the stars but was now within her reach. Then, one fateful afternoon, as Mr. Whitaker entered the cafe, Lily was sitting at her usual table, reading over her Japanese vocabulary list. Without thinking, she stood up and walked over to him. Clara, who was serving at the counter, noticed her daughter's boldness and felt her heart race with both pride and worry. "Mr. Whitaker," Lily said in hesitant but clear Japanese, "excuse me, I heard you speaking earlier, and I wanted to say I can understand a little of what you said." Mr. Whitaker looked up, surprised. He studied the young girl in front of him, his eyes narrowing as he tried to process what she had just said. There was a moment of stunned silence before he replied, in flawless Japanese, "You speak Japanese?" Lily nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "Yes, just a little. I've been learning on my own." The businessman's face softened, and for the first time, a genuine smile tugged at his lips. "That's impressive for someone so young," he said, his voice full of admiration. They continued their conversation in Japanese, with Lily shyly sharing what she had learned, and Mr. Whitaker, in turn, offering her words of encouragement. It was a strange, unexpected connection between two worlds that seemed so different, yet so intertwined. As their conversation ended, Mr. Whitaker looked at Lily with a newfound respect. "You have an incredible gift," he said. "You remind me of someone I once knew, someone who believed in the power of knowledge and never let obstacles stand in the way of their dreams." From that day forward, everything changed for both Lily and Mr. Whitaker. Mr. Whitaker, moved by Lily's determination, took it upon himself to help her further her studies, providing her with the resources to attend language classes and even offering her internships at his companies to expose her to the professional world. In return, Lily brought a spark of joy and purpose into his life that he hadn't realized he was missing. The millionaire's world, once cold and isolated, was now filled with warmth, as he became deeply invested in Lily's growth, not just as a student, but as a person. Over time, their bond grew beyond language lessons. It became a story of how unexpected connections can change lives. Lily had started out as a little girl with a dream and, against all, Yumi had always been an old soul, even as a child. Growing up in a modest neighborhood in Tokyo, she learned early on the value of empathy and connection, seeing her parents work tirelessly to make ends meet while always finding time to show kindness to others. It was this quiet grace that made her stand out in a world that often felt cold and transactional. Her father, a local merchant, taught her to value people over wealth, an idea that clashed with the society they lived in, a society where status and money were everything. Yet, despite their modest means, Yumi's family lived a life full of warmth, where the simplest gestures of care and understanding seemed to speak louder than any material possession. It wasn't long before Yumi's compassionate nature caught the attention of someone who, on the surface, seemed to live in an entirely different world. Takashi Fujiwara was a wealthy Japanese millionaire, known for his cutting-edge technology firm that had revolutionized several industries. A business mogul by all accounts, Takashi was the epitome of success in a country that revered wealth and influence. Yet, despite his outward accomplishments, Takashi was profoundly lonely, a man whose drive for success had left him isolated and disconnected. Behind the tailored suits and public accolades, he was a man who had forgotten what it meant to truly be understood. Takashi's life was a series of meetings, deals, and parties, where faces were interchangeable and interactions felt more like transactions than genuine connections. His wealth, while impressive, was not enough to fill the hollow space inside him, a space that no amount of luxury could ever touch. He had no close friends, no family he felt he could turn to. In fact, the more success he gained, the more distant he became from the people around him. Everything changed one rainy afternoon when Takashi, overwhelmed by a particularly challenging business decision, found himself seeking refuge in a small cafe in the heart of Tokyo. The cafe was a far cry from the opulence he was used to, dimly lit, with wooden tables and the faint smell of freshly brewed tea lingering in the air. There, in the corner of the room, sat Yumi, a young woman who worked as a barista. Despite her age, there was something about her presence that made Takashi pause. It wasn't the way she looked, it was the warmth in her eyes, the way she spoke to customers, always listening, always offering a word of comfort or encouragement. Something in her energy drew him in, a stark contrast to the cold, impersonal world he inhabited. Takashi, hesitant but intrigued, ordered a cup of tea and sat at a nearby table, his thoughts swirling. Yumi noticed him immediately. She had seen him around town before, his face familiar from the business sections of newspapers, but she never imagined she would ever speak to him. As he sat there, looking lost in thought, she found herself drawn to him. There was something in his expression, a mixture of exhaustion and frustration that spoke to her in a way words never could. Slowly, without thinking much of it, she approached him with a quiet smile and asked, "Is everything okay?" You look like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders. Takashi was taken aback by the genuine concern in her voice. It wasn't the polite small talk he was used to from those around him, but something deeper, something real. For a moment, he didn't know how to respond. No one had ever asked him that question in such an unguarded way. For once, he didn't have to hide behind his title or his wealth. He found himself telling her everything about the pressure of his company, the loneliness that seemed to suffocate him, and the constant struggle to maintain the image of success that had come at the expense of his own happiness. Yumi listened quietly, never interrupting, just allowing him to speak. And as he did, something inside him shifted. The dam he had built around his heart began to crack, just a little. When he finished, he looked at her, embarrassed by the vulnerability he had just shown, but Yumi simply smiled warmly and said, "It's okay. Sometimes, you don't need all the answers. Sometimes, you just need someone to listen." Those simple words, spoken with such sincerity, opened something in Takashi that he hadn't known was there. For the first time in years, he felt understood. Yumi didn't see him as a billionaire or a businessman, she saw him as a person, someone who, despite his success, was hurting. It was a gift he never expected, and it left him shaken in the most profound way. Over the following weeks, Takashi returned to the cafe regularly. Each time, he found comfort in Yumi's presence, in her genuine curiosity about his life that went beyond his wealth and achievements. Their conversations were simple but profound discussions about dreams, fears, and the small things in life that often go unnoticed. Slowly, Takashi began to rediscover the parts of himself that he had lost along the way: the joy of a quiet morning, the importance of kindness, and the realization that success wasn't just measured by the balance of a bank account, but by the depth of the connections we have with others. For Yumi, helping Takashi feel understood wasn't about fixing his problems or offering him solutions. It was about giving him the gift of presence, showing him that he was more than his wealth, more than his business empire. She had reminded him of the beauty in simple human connection, something he had lost sight of in his relentless pursuit of success. By listening, by caring, she had given him back a piece of himself that he thought was gone forever. Takashi, once a man lost in his world of wealth and isolation, found a new purpose, one that was built not on the foundation of his financial empire, but on the quiet understanding of a young woman who simply saw him for who he truly was. A lavish dinner party was in full swing at the grand penthouse of Arthur Langford, a self-made millionaire whose name was synonymous with success. Surrounded by influential figures in finance and society, Arthur sat at the head of the table, effortlessly commanding attention with his wealth, charm, and quick wit. He had built an empire from the ground up, yet there was something missing in his life, something money couldn't buy. Despite his outward confidence, Arthur often felt isolated in a world where conversations revolved around figures and deals, leaving little room for genuine connection. Among the guests was his 10-year-old niece, Lily, who had been brought along to the dinner by her mother, Arthur's sister. Unlike the others, Lily wasn't interested in the polished conversations of high society or the hushed murmurs about investments. She was a curious child, more interested in the way people felt than what they owned, and she had no intention of sitting quietly through the evening's festivities. As the dinner progressed, the adults discussed everything from stock market trends to luxury real estate, each one trying to outdo the other with tales of success. Arthur, while adept at keeping the conversation going, felt a subtle emptiness growing within him, as if he was drifting further from something that once mattered: human connection. The words flowed around him, but none of them seemed to reach his heart. Just as he began to withdraw into himself, Lily, sitting next to him at the table, tugged at his sleeve. "Uncle Arthur, I have a question," she said, her wide, innocent eyes shining with curiosity. The conversation at the table slowed, everyone's attention momentarily turning to the young girl. "What's the best thing you've ever done with your money?" Lily asked, her voice sweet but direct. A hush fell over the room. Arthur, taken aback by the question, chuckled nervously, unsure how to answer. He had always been praised for his ability to grow his wealth, but no one had ever asked him something so personal, so simple. For a moment, the millionaire was speechless. His mind raced as he sifted through the many acquisitions he had made over the years, the expensive cars, the lavish vacations, the towering mansions, but none of them felt like the best thing. All of it felt hollow in the face of Lily's innocent question. He cleared his throat and looked down at her, a sudden vulnerability flickering in his eyes. "Well, I suppose I've donated to charity a few times," he began, unsure where the words would take him. "I've helped build hospitals and schools, given grants to organizations," but even as the words left his lips, Arthur realized they didn't satisfy him. Lily wasn't looking for a list of charitable deeds or a business-driven answer. She was looking for something real, something that resonated with the part of him that craved human connection, not just success. The room waited for him to say more, but it was clear that the question had unsettled him. Lily, sensing his discomfort, didn't back down. Instead, she leaned in closer and asked, "But what makes you feel happy when you give money? Like, what makes you smile because you know you helped someone?" Her question, so pure and untainted by the complexities of adult life, hit Arthur like a wave. He had never considered it in those terms. Sure, he had made donations, but he had always approached them as transactions, as obligations, or ways to polish his public image. But Lily wasn't interested in the surface. She wanted to know about the heart of it, the joy, the warmth, the feeling that something had truly changed. Arthur swallowed, his mind searching for an answer that didn't feel like a business transaction. And then, unexpectedly, something clicked. He remembered a visit to a small, struggling orphanage he had made years ago, before his empire had fully bloomed. He had spent a few hours there, playing with the children, listening to their stories. At the time, he had simply donated a generous sum to improve their conditions, but looking back, he realized that the moment he spent with those children, the laughter, the connection, the feeling of truly helping someone in need had stayed with him long after the money had been spent. It wasn't the check he had written that had made an impact, it was the genuine human connection he had felt. Arthur looked at Lily, her eyes bright with curiosity, and for the first time in a long time, he smiled genuinely, without pretense. "You know, Lily," he began, his voice soft but sincere, "the best thing I've ever done with my money wasn't about buildings or hospitals. It was a day I spent with kids at an orphanage. I didn't just give them money, I listened to them. I played with them. I saw their faces light up, and I realized that the real gift was being present in their lives. I was there, and I was able to make a difference just by showing up." The room was silent, and Arthur felt a weight lifting off his shoulders, as if his words had unlocked something in him he hadn't realized he'd been searching for. Lily beamed at him, her smile reflecting the unspoken understanding that had passed between them. For a moment, the glittering world of wealth and status faded, and all that mattered was the simple connection between a child and her uncle. In that instant, Arthur Langford realized that true success wasn't measured in assets, but in moments of genuine human connection. And it was a young girl's question, asked with pure innocence, that reminded him of what truly mattered. It was a dinner to remember, not because of the wealth that filled the room, but because of the way one small, heartfelt exchange could change the way someone saw the world. In a sleek, towering building in the heart of the city, William Forbes, a wealthy businessman with a reputation for being ruthless and unapproachable, found himself in a situation that he never could have anticipated. For years, his life had been dictated by board meetings, stock portfolios, and luxury worlds away from the lives of the less fortunate. He had built his empire from the ground up, but somewhere along the way, he had lost touch with the people he once promised to help, consumed by his drive for success. It was on a routine trip to a local charity event that William's life would change in a way he never could have imagined. As he arrived at the event, a gathering meant to raise funds for underprivileged children, he saw a little girl, no older than 7, standing alone at the side of the room. She was small and delicate, with dark hair tied in pigtails and a nervous expression on her face. Her clothes were worn, frayed at the edges, and despite the abundance of luxury around her, she appeared utterly out of place. Her name was Sophia, and she had come with her mother, a single parent who worked tirelessly to provide for her daughter. The mother had tried to find a moment of peace at the event, but Sophia, shy and overwhelmed by the noise and the grandeur, had quietly wandered away from the crowd, finding a corner where she could escape. William noticed her immediately. In his many years of business dealings, he had learned to read people, to understand their needs, their desires, and their weaknesses, but there was something in Sophia's eyes that made him pause. It wasn't fear or sadness, it was a deep, unfathomable quiet that spoke of a life William couldn't comprehend. Moved by a sudden impulse, William approached her, his polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. As he knelt down to her level, she looked up at him, her eyes wide and innocent. "Hello there," William said, his voice kind but formal. Sophia didn't respond right away. Instead, she continued to stare at him, her little brow furrowed. "What's your name?" William asked, his tone warm, hoping to break the ice. But Sophia simply shook her head. She couldn't speak a word of English. She had arrived in the city only a few months earlier, after her family had emigrated from a small village overseas, seeking a better life. She had learned a few words in her new language, but the overwhelming environment left her feeling small and lost. William, accustomed to speaking in corporate terms and dealing with high-powered executives, suddenly found himself in a situation that had nothing to do with profit margins or contracts. He knew that the language barrier was something he couldn't overcome with money, with influence, or with power. He needed something simpler. The connection was instantaneous, although neither of them knew it at the time. William, after pausing for a moment, remembered something from his youth, a game he had played as a child when words weren't enough. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, polished stone he kept as a good luck charm. Holding it out in the palm of his hand, he gently placed it between them. Sophia's eyes immediately lit up with curiosity, and she slowly reached out, her small fingers brushing against the stone. She held it for a moment, examining it closely, before looking back up at William. In that simple exchange, something shifted in her, a sense of trust, of understanding, that went beyond language. William, sensing the moment, smiled and mimed a gesture of throwing the stone into the air, then catching it again. Sophia's face brightened even further as she copied his actions, throwing the stone high and catching it as best as she could. The act was simple, but it was a shared language between them, no words needed, just a playful connection that transcended their differences. For the next few moments, they stood there together, silently communicating through the rhythmic motion of tossing and catching the stone. Around them, the noise of the charity event continued, but in that moment, it was just William and Sophia, two souls who found understanding in the simplest of gestures. Eventually, Sophia's mother, who had been searching for her daughter, approached, and William stood to his feet, offering a courteous handshake. He made sure to speak with kindness, explaining how well Sophia had done in their silent game. He couldn't speak her language, but he could see how much joy this small connection had brought her. Sophia's mother smiled, tears welling up in her eyes as she thanked William, knowing how difficult it had been for her daughter to adjust to a new life, a new world. But what Sophia had shown him, and what William had realized in that brief encounter, was that connection wasn't always about speaking the same words. It was about the space between them, the silent understanding, the shared humanity, the simplicity of a smile, a gesture, a moment of light in an unfamiliar place. In the weeks that followed, William became more involved in community outreach programs, learning to appreciate the language of empathy over the language of business. He helped Sophia's family settle into their new life, offering support in ways he had never considered before, helping her mother find a stable job, supporting educational programs for Sophia, and ensuring they both had the resources to succeed. But most importantly, he had learned from Sophia that real communication goes beyond words. It comes from the heart, from the willingness to see another person, not as a problem to be solved, but as a human being to be understood. In a world filled with language barriers and cultural divides, Sophia's simple, unspoken connection had bridged a gap that no amount of wealth or power could have ever touched. And for the first time in his life, William realized that sometimes, the most profound understanding doesn't need words, it only needs a willingness to listen, to connect, and to share. At the age of 6, Lily Thompson didn't know much about wealth or power, but she understood kindness and the lack of it. She lived in a small, cramped apartment with her single mother, a waitress who worked long hours just to make ends meet. Despite their struggles, Lily's world was filled with laughter, love, and an unwavering belief that everything would be okay, no matter how tough the days got. One evening, while Lily's mother worked an extra shift, they found themselves at a community dinner for low-income families, a gathering meant to provide a warm meal and a sense of connection to those who had little. The event was held at a lavish banquet hall, far removed from Lily's everyday world, and as she looked around, she was amazed by the opulence of the room: crystal chandeliers, tables adorned with fine china, and an air of sophistication that felt foreign to her. It was there, amidst the glittering surroundings, that she encountered Richard Caldwell, a self-made millionaire and the host of the event. Richard was well known for his business acumen and wealth, but he was equally infamous for his cold demeanor and rigid sense of entitlement. He rarely interacted with anyone outside of his high society circles, and his indifference to the struggles of the less fortunate was legendary. That night, he sat at a long, polished table, surrounded by influential guests, as servers offered courses of gourmet food. Lily, her small frame barely visible over the edge of the table, walked in with her mother, holding her hand tightly. As they passed Richard's table, Lily couldn't help but notice how everyone seemed to be laughing and talking in hushed, polished voices, as though the meal were more about status than sustenance. She saw the large plates of food being served to the guests, so abundant and elegant, while the long line of families waiting for their meals was filled with uncertainty. Her stomach growled, but Lily kept quiet. Then, out of nowhere, she turned to her mother and whispered, "Why don't they just give us the food on the table? We could eat it and be so happy." Her voice, small but clear, cut through the room like a knife. Richard, who had been immersed in a conversation about stocks and investments, glanced over with mild curiosity at the sound of the little girl's innocent words. He wasn't accustomed to children in these kinds of settings, let alone ones who spoke their minds so freely. Lily's mother, embarrassed, quickly shushed her, but the damage had already been done. Richard, who had never really thought about the disparity between the haves and the have-nots, found himself staring at the child, the simplicity of her statement disarming him in a way he hadn't expected. He looked at the plates of food on his table gleaming, untouched, and then at the hungry faces in the crowd. The contrast was impossible to ignore. His dinner, once a symbol of success and excess, now felt hollow. The people he had invited to this event, his peers and colleagues, were too busy discussing their fortunes to see the reality outside the walls of the hall. But this little girl, this child, had seen it. She had pointed out the glaring truth that he, with all his wealth and experience, had never acknowledged. In that moment, Richard felt something stir inside him, a sense of discomfort, guilt, and perhaps even shame. What had he been doing all these years, accumulating wealth while ignoring the needs of those who had nothing? What good was all his success if it only created more distance between himself and the very people who could benefit from even a fraction of his abundance? As the evening wore on, Richard could not shake the thought of Lily's words. The luxury around him seemed less like a privilege and more like a burden. He found himself repeatedly looking at her, her small face illuminated by the soft glow of the chandelier. Eventually, he excused himself from the table and walked over to Lily and her mother. They were sitting near the back, still waiting for their meal, and Lily looked up at him with wide eyes, curious but cautious. "Hello," Richard said, his voice surprisingly soft. "I couldn't help but hear what you said earlier." Lily's mother frowned, unsure of where this conversation was headed, but Richard continued, "You're right. There's no reason why people should go hungry when there's so much here. Tell me, what would you want to eat if you could have anything?" Lily's eyes widened. "Anything?" she asked, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. Richard nodded. "Anything at all?" Without hesitation, Lily grinned and said, "I'd have pizza. With lots of cheese, and maybe some pepperoni. Oh, and a big glass of lemonade." Richard laughed, the sound genuine and free. Then, unexpectedly, he stood up straight and turned to the servers nearby. "Please," he called, "bring a pizza for this young lady. And make sure it's the biggest one you've got." Moments later, a piping hot, oversized pizza arrived at their table, and for the first time that night, Lily's mother felt a warmth that wasn't born of hunger but of something far more human: compassion. Richard, who had spent a lifetime in pursuit of wealth and status, realized that the true richness of life didn't lie in how much one could accumulate, but in how much one could give. That night, as Lily enjoyed her pizza, a simple act of kindness from a little girl had opened Richard's eyes to a truth he had never considered. The course of his evening and perhaps his entire life had changed with her innocent words, and from that moment on, Richard Caldwell became a man on a mission to use his fortune to help those who needed it most.